Overpriced, overhyped, overly complex, and slow.
This is AWD. It is no sign of class wealth.
DSM cars are the toxic part of 1990s automotive fandom. It's 1991, and this is a Dodge Stealth RT twin turbo. Mitsubishi was on ecstasy at the time, and Chrysler is getting sober thanks to Lee Iacocca, so let's both of us build a car. But we'll let Mitsubishi do all the work. Yeah, he likes doing the work anyway. Look, even on the Atlas, the Road Atlas, look at the cover. This pig is touching a woman inappropriately and looking at her tits. And as usual, Helen has to just smile and nice her way out of this creepy encounter. And the engine, the Mitsubishi 6G72. It's a 3-liter, really 2.972, twin turbo, double overhead cam, 24-valve transverse V6, making 296 horsepower at 6,000 RPM and 304 pound-feet of torque at 2,500 RPM. And you can't use it because this motor is more fragile than a Proud Boy's self-efficacy. The owner, Chris, told me that, yeah, this car is a beautiful survivor, but don't rev the engine too hard or high or cause stress to the car in any way because I don't know what's going to happen. Any one of these vacuum lines goes. There's a lot of vacuum lines. And the engine has to come out. And if the exhaust gaskets leak, the engine has to come out. And if something has to the turbos, the engine has to come out. And if the spark plugs foul, the engine doesn't have to come out, but you will need a new intake manifold gasket because to get at the rear spark plugs, you have to take the intake manifold off. So all the fans of Dodge Stealths and Mitsubishi 3000 GTs and Mitsubishi GTOs, all they can do is gather and pose and preen and brag and strut around and proselytize over their almost 300 horsepower. But ask any of them to post up and you'll hear excuses instead of spooling turbos. Oh, you can get more. You can get more than 300. Chris's only modification to the car is pulling this little plug, which the point of the plug was to limit the boost to 9 pounds, but you can plug that and get a whole lot more. And right now, this car is making 320 horsepower. But, man, everything about this car is fragile. But kudos to Chris. He purchased this Stealth in 2001, and then it had 128,000 miles, and currently it has 184,000 miles. He's done a hell of a job keeping this in working order, and as always, we have to tip our hats to anybody with that kind of commitment, especially at a time when fewer and fewer of these types of cars are commonplace sightings on the road. And the pearl white paint job makes this look like a contemporary car in some ways. And by Chris's own description, it's a car that encourages looky-loos to whip out their cameras. People look at this like, is that new? Is that a prototype? No, this is from 91. Also, photography thing here. What's the hardest car to take pictures of? These brilliant white cars from 1990. They just mess with your exposure. Speaking of film, this partnership between Chrysler and Mitsubishi Motors and the Dodge Stealth, which it produces, well, this is the automotive equivalent of a student filmmaker's first feature. They wanted to show off all the things they could do that they thought would impress the people they were making it for, with its minimalist dialogue, monochrome film stock, and Dutch angles. All the Dutch angles.
The sound of God is in the margins. I was beginning to understand that before the reckoning. But then it came. And the world was swallowed. And I found myself again, north of the equator, graded on a curve.
This is a car that could only really have existed in the late 80s and early 90s crucible of automotive history, where the norm meant electronics were being incorporated into engine management, computerized elements were factoring into design, and companies were sharing platforms not just domestically but internationally as well. Yes, these engines are kind of 80s tech, but they're such a particular piece of a very particular time in automotive history that if you have any sort of nostalgia for this era whatsoever, you're going to cut a Dodge Stealth way more flack than you would with just about any other car. It's to the point where you almost want to overlook any number of the things that are wrong with it. Almost. The RT Turbo MSRP'd for $29,206 in 1990. Well, let's say when you're done at the dealership, you can get this thing out the door for $30,000 in 1991. Well, in 2018 money, that's $56,167. Whoa. In 2018, you could get a Kia Stinger GT, that is a modern twin-turbo V6, for around $45,000. So what did you get for the buying power of 56 large in 1991? You got an animated HVAC display, powered lower seat, ludicrously small rear seats, leather, 5-speed manual, all-wheel drive, a Pentastar logo, AM/FM radio with a manual equalizer, and a cassette player with Dolby Digital Noise Reduction. Not sure if it's Dolby A or B though. A CD player. Okay, this was a big option in 91. A boost gauge. That's accurate-ish. A 12-volt power plug between the CD deck and the shift boot, and a separate cigarette lighter. A 180-mile-an-hour speedometer, that would impress anybody who doesn't know anything about cars. Cruise control. Radio and volume controls on the wheel. Okay, that's cool for 91. Magnetic mirror cover, pop-up headlights, a car alarm, a power radio antenna, and instructions in the manual impressing on you the importance of towing your Stealth on a flatbed because it's all-wheel drive. So you do get heaps of tech gadgets for 1991, but the price was still outrageous, eliminating the young man market. This was supposed to be a sports car for Dodge. They were supposed to take a 3000 GT so they would have something before the Viper was really out and really could be sold and was reliable. This was a stopgap measure. So fine. Here's a sports car, and it's gonna be reliable, and it's gonna be affordable. Oh crap, why is no one buying this? So if no one was buying this car as a sports car, the Dodge Stealth was then marketed as a Grand Tourer for middle-aged folks who could afford something whose price was creeping into the BMW Z1 territory. But it's not a Grand Tourer. Its trunk is a shelf. The cup holders are hidden in the center console, and it's way too cramped inside for long trips. Calling a Dodge Stealth a GT car and expecting that label to retroactively stick is the automotive equivalent of the "I was joking" defense after your shitty behavior gets you in trouble. The equivalent 1991 Toyota MR2 SW20 Turbo was a better deal than this thing. It was also a turbocharged car, which was almost as fast, and that thing was selling for $18,778, which in 2018 money is $35,157, and you get more room, more sport, and more fun. Which brings us to another problem that Chris himself has encountered, namely that it's hard to even find decent parts for the Dodge Stealth these days. It's a car that begs to be customized, but it doesn't seem as though it ever was intended to still be on the road 27 years later. Of course, you could say that about any car, but for a vehicle like this, which is so much a product of its specific era, it seems difficult to picture anyone expecting this car to be alive this long, much less in the condition that it's in. So all I can really do is just drive it and enjoy it as a capsule. It can't perform and can't sing and can't race like it was intended to. It can't mock as a GT Tourer like the marketing said it would, and you're not going to throw this around like a sports car because it's still far too expensive. You want to use one of these things in good condition, they're hovering around $10,000 on Bring a Trailer. And maybe that doesn't sound like much for 90s nostalgia, but it's going to cost more than that keeping this thing running. But there's something to be said for taking what's a stopgap product and presenting it in a flashy package that gives the impression of something grander. Some people love the movie The Social Network, while others thought it was an overrated movie about an overrated subject. But it has one of the greatest trailers ever made. That trailer used a choir singing Radiohead and builds the anxiety, the pressure, and the stakes the characters went through in creating a website that gets used to spread your estranged uncle's racist image macros. It does more with less, creating something akin to a short film that condenses the film into 3 minutes without giving too much of it away. The same could be said for the trailer of Man of Steel, which is legitimately one of the best trailers in history, taking the relative simplicity of the Superman mythos, its subtext as an outsider story, and wrapping it all up with a musical theme that does the impossible by rivaling the Superman theme John Williams composed. But the difference is that, for the most part, Those trailers hold up, regardless of how the movies were received. Whereas I'm not exactly sure you could say the same for the Dodge Stealth, because everybody in the 90s forgot about the Dodge Stealth the second the Viper came along. Because people were comfortable that we're back. We're America, doing what America does best. We throw displacement at the problem and declare victory. Oh, you hate it that we do that, England. But you love seeing it. And anyway, time has dulled the impression of Facebook being as revolutionary as it was. And a lot of people who defended the new take on Superman ultimately changed their tunes when the subsequent DC movies came out and made him more of a My Chemical Romance fan. The Dodge Stealth may have looked cool and state-of-the-art, and for a brief time it may have seemed interesting and worthy of reverence in its own time, but it didn't take long to feel dated and for its flaws to rise to the surface. And it's hard to overlook those flaws in the light of what would come later. That isn't to say that every car should be judged against its successors, but more than most, the Dodge Stealth never seemed like it was meant to have any real staying power. After all, in the modern used market, the 3000 GT commands more money, even though it's the same car. Yeah, I know the 3000 GT has a rear wing that looks different and some of them move around and you can get Euro parts to make it the ultimate one. The Dodge Stealth was a really, really good appetizer, like bruschetta done right. But you forget about it the second your entree comes. The idea that this car is still on the road at all is amazing. But the more time passes, the more it seems that the thing you thought was dynamic, like Superman, was really just forgettable, like a buttoned-up, mild-mannered reporter. Now, if you excuse me, I think I hear a plane in freefall.
This is a Dodge Stealth. It is no sign of class wealth. It's just a dog. The 90s. God bless the 90s. God bless the 90s. Take us back to the 90s. Well, okay, maybe not this time.